Everyone. Welcome to our Affordable Housing 101 webinar. My name is Lucia Hughes, Housing Manager for the City of Fremont. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to my City of Fremont colleagues, Lynn Chen, Margot Juta, Maria Salinas, Trish Cordova, and Sharon Jones, who will be helping out with today's webinar logistics. We are excited to let you know that in the next month or so, the city will have two affordable housing developments coming online, Doug Ford Senior Apartments and Granite Ridge Family Apartments. I'd like to take this opportunity to walk you through today's agenda. We are very excited to have Jared Wright, Senior Project Manager for Abode Services, and Maya Powers, Assistant Vice President for the Jon Stewart Company, to give you an overview on the eligibility requirements and application process on Doug Ford Senior Apartments. We are also very pleased to have Barbara Blazer, Lease Up and Rehab Manager for Eden Housing, to walk you through the eligibility requirements and application process on Granite Ridge Family Apartments. We will then take a 5-minute break. After the break, we will have Molly Current, Fair Housing Director for Fremont Fair Housing Project Sentinel, to give us a presentation on fair housing for all, rights and responsibilities. We are very pleased to have Molly. We will then have 10 minutes for Q&As. Before we kick off our first presentation, I'd like to touch on a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our housing webpage at www.fremont.gov/housing workshops, which is shown on the screen. Slides from today's presentations will also be posted. If you have questions, please post your questions in the chat box. We will have about 10 minutes at the end of the meeting to answer a few questions. We may not have enough time to answer all of the questions. A complete list of Q&As will be posted on the webpage. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jared Wright of Allied Housing and Maya Powers of Jon Stewart Company to give us an overview on Doug Ford Senior Apartments. Welcome, Jared and Maya.
Thank you, Lucia. I'm going to share my screen. Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Wright. I am a project manager with Allied Housing Abode Services. I am going to back up to the first slide. Okay, I'm here to talk about the Doug Ford Community Apartments. Here is a view of what the building will look like. And Allied Housing, in conjunction with Abode Services, is constructing the Doug Ford Apartments right now. So I want to tell you a little bit about this opportunity. We will have 44 units available by application and wait list lottery to apply for. This will include 39 one-bedroom units and 5 two-bedroom units. This is a senior apartment community. So seniors 55 and up are eligible to apply. We are, as I mentioned, under construction, and construction is expected to be completed in October of 2022. So the location of Doug Ford Senior Community is at the corner of Irvington Avenue and Fremont Boulevard in Fremont. There will be a preference for households who live and work in Fremont, Newark, or Union City. And we will be announcing a waitlist opening date soon. It will be sometime in the summer of 2022. So eligibility, as I mentioned, will be for seniors aged 55 and up, and for senior households who earn up to 50% of area median income. We have units available for up to 40% of AMI, and up to 50% of area median income. We'll talk more about that later. So some of the site amenities, and here is a layout of the site. First floor, we have on-site property management. We have an activity room, a dog walk area, a community garden, a computer lab, and a community room with a kitchen and common laundry facilities. There is surface parking available on site, and there is secure bike parking available as well. This is supportive housing, so we will have services available, resident services on site. We will have a full-time service coordinator and 2 full-time case managers available officed on site. So here's what a 1-bedroom unit will look like. The 2-bedroom units are fairly similar, just add a bedroom. So each unit has a balcony, a full kitchen with a stove and an oven. Bathroom has a bathtub and a shower. There's a separate bedroom with its own closet, and there's also a hallway closet. The 1 bedrooms are about 515 square feet, and the 2 bedrooms are about 720 square feet. So more on the rent and the maximum income to qualify and minimum income to qualify. So this table shows you if you're in a 1-bedroom unit, there are 2 different income tiers for the 1-bedroom units. There's 40% AMI and 50% AMI. We have 17 units of 40% AMI 1-bedrooms and 22 units of 50% AMI 1-bedrooms. So the rent, this gives you an idea of what the rent would be for the 1-bedroom units at these different income tiers. And to qualify for, you have to be making at least 2 times the rent. So this column on the right gives you an idea of what the minimum income would be to qualify to lease up these respective units. So for the 2-bedroom units at 40% AMI, you would need a minimum of $2,350 per month to qualify for that unit. So for maximum income, we refer to the area median income for Alameda County by household size. So someone in a 50% AMI unit for a 2-person household would need to be making below $54,800 to qualify. Here is some information about how to apply for Doug Ford Community Apartments. So you can go online to housing.acgov.org to fill out an application online. You can also call. This is the leasing office phone number, and I'll show this slide again at the end. And you can go into our leasing office in person at 4000 Fremont Boulevard, Suite D in Fremont. So we will be taking applications via waitlist and lottery process. The way this works is applicants will submit an application either online or in paper version before the closing of the waitlist. Upon closing of the waitlist, we will run a digital randomized lottery. The waitlist will be sorted by preference tier. And then within 2 weeks of the waitlist closing, applicants will begin to receive letters announcing their final placement. The next step in the process for applicants that make it to the top of the wait list will be contacted for eligibility interviews. For the eligibility interview, there will be documentation required. And Maya, if you want to jump in and add some some commentary at this point, feel free to do so.
Sure, I can run through this.
Yeah, okay.
So once the lottery, as Jared said, once the lottery is conducted and we've done a sort to establish the preference by priority, which is outlined in our tenant selection criteria, which will be made available either through the leasing office and or on the county website portal where you can apply online. We'll determine final rankings for our wait list. We'll get those letters out and we'll begin outreach to the top folks on the wait list in blocks typically. And as we outreach, we'll ask to set up in-person interviews. That requires that all household members attend in person and provide some of the documentation that's listed on this slide. You'll need a valid picture, photo ID, copies of 3 months worth of bank statements, for checking accounts, for asset accounts, savings accounts. You'll want your most current statement and any other documentation for sources of income outside of employment, such as unemployment documentation. And upon that interview, we'll run through some of the a checklist with you. Any missing items, you'll be provided with a memo stating what you need to bring back in order for us to complete your application. We will also start the background check process at that point. And from there, it takes at least 2 weeks to process the application, given that we have all of the necessary documentation. We do process in order of the wait list. So we call folks in order of the wait list. We try to interview in order of the wait list. But if you are no-show for your interview, we continue to move through the list because we have an obligation to, lease this building up. And in terms of units, we do not hold units. So we ask that you move in ready. You have all your documentation in order, so that way we can expedite your application and really get you moved in order of the wait list.
So is my understanding correct that not all of the documents here are really may be applicable to each person who's applying or household that's applying? It's just really all of the things that do apply.
That's correct. What applies to their individual household.
Right. So one more time, here is how to apply. And if you didn't catch it, Maya is with the John Stewart Company. The John Stewart Company is handling lease up and property management at Doug Ford Community Apartments.
I will also say something unique to City of Fremont is that they require most recent tax return for the household. So that's another item that you would want to bring with you to your certification interview. I see a lot of questions coming through the chat, but I'll wait until then.
Okay, so yes, thank you, Maya, for bringing up the tax return. So we know that not everybody file tax return due to various legitimate reasons. So if you do not have a tax return, the City of Fremont will also take the status of non-filing from IRS. From what I understand is that it's pretty easy to get. You just go on the IRS website, type in your information, and you will get documentation that IRS says, yes, you have a status of non-filing, which is acceptable to the City of Fremont. Okay, so thank you so much, Jared and Maya. Our next speaker is with Eden Housing, Barbara Blazer, and her title is Granite Ridge Family Apartments Lease-Up Manager and Rehab Manager. And Barbara will give us an overview on the eligibility requirements and lease-up process on the Granite Ridge Family Apartments. Please join me in welcoming Barbara.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here to introduce a little brief about Granite Ridge, our newest Eden project in Fremont. We anticipate construction to be done in September of 2022. The project is located on Sequoia Road, approximately 3 miles away from the BART system. The number of units are 73 affordable units. 15 of the units are provided or designated for supportive housing for people that are exiting homelessness. The remaining 57 units will be filled by our running of our lottery. We do have an occupancy and a approximate square footage of the units. Our 1 bedroom, 1 bath is approximately 670 square feet. Our 2 bedroom, 1 bath is approximately 1,007. And our 3 bedroom, 2 bath units are approximately 1,318. Oops. I think I lost access to move my screens.
Go ahead and stop sharing, Barbara, and then share the screen again. Thank you.
Our occupancy level for our units for a 1 bedroom would be a maximum of 3. A 2 bedroom has a minimum of 2, maximum of 5. Our 3 bedroom units are a maximum of 7 with a minimum of 3. A live-in aid can also be considered part of the occupancy. So someone with a need for a live-in aid would need to third-party verify. Background screening, they would be essential to the care, but not essential for the financial support of the home. Since we are a low-income housing tax credit program, we are designated on certain area median incomes. For example, you can see that we have our affordable homes at apartments at 40, 50, and 60%. When we're considering your income, we're considering all income, whether it be self-employment, Social Security, any asset income, any regular contributions from retirement funds, and that would be the gross annual income. So for instance, a household of 3, the maximum gross annual income cannot exceed $77,160. All applicants will have an interview, phone interview that will request all documents. We'll provide an interview letter, will detail all the required documents that need to be provided. The waitlist will be open and accepting pre-applications. We're anticipating June 16th through the 29th. It'll be on the Alameda County portal. If you go to our website at edenhousing.org, find a home, it'll have a link once our pre-application period opens. Pre-applications will be accepted online only. However, exceptions will be made for reasonable accommodations to make sure that anyone that's interested in applying will have ability to apply. No documents are needed at the time to apply, nor is there a fee for applying. All pre-applications will be run into a lottery Excel spreadsheet, starting with a preference for anyone that lives or works in the cities of Fremont, Newark, and Union City. Translation services and also technical support will be available, including a computer lab to make sure, again, everyone that's interested in applying will be able to have the ability to apply. Once the pre-application opens up, please remember to complete your pre-application completely with all household members, all income, all relative, answer all relative questions. Be sure to include your live work preference in any of the Tri-Cities. The goal of the housing is as soon as the apartments are completed in construction and ready to be occupied, is to start renting as soon as possible. So starting as soon as 2 weeks after the lottery is completed, pre-application is closed and the lottery is completed, phone interviews will start. We'll start out with an initial phone interview. We will send you by email and by mail a requirement of what's needed in order to qualify for housing. It will be based on the lottery order with sorting with the preference of anyone that listed that they either worked or lived in the cities of Fremont, Union City, and Newark. Applicants should review the interview letter requirements and frequent questions to help understand what's going to be needed to be at what will be asked at the interview and what will be requested to bring in to the lease space to document income and eligibility. Eden will also conduct a criminal credit screening following the interview to verify all sources of income, assets, and screening. Eden Housing is has pet-friendly communities. Pets are allowed. A pet deposit for non-service animals is $150. There's no additional pet fees. There is the mandatory that pets are requested permission by property management prior to moving a pet in. There's additional requirements, including immunization, registration, and then also there is restrictions in the amount of animals and the type of animals. For example, 1 dog is allowed, 1 cat, or 2 birds, but not a combination. We also have a restriction on size of animal and breeds. Full details on the pets can be provided upon interview process. But again, Eden is a pet-friendly community. Approving applicants will be notified at the soonest opportunity. So once you've gone through you've been selected through lottery to be interviewed, we have conducted the initial phone interview. You are provided the required documents, and the required documents would include any income, any assets. So income could be self-employment. It could also include anything that you would receive from your retirement funds. Once we have qualified you and the building is completing construction, we're requesting that you sign a lease within 10 days of notification of approval. Those applicants that have to provide a 30-day notice to their current landlord will be permitted to move in at a later date. But because this is a lease up and because we're needing to fill the units as soon as possible and there is a high demand, we do request that you understand that when you're interviewing, that as soon as the building is completed, we are looking to occupy the building. Security deposits and all move-in costs will be outlined in the unit offer letter and are due at lease signing. Applicants will have the lease, community robes, and all the addendums to be reviewed by management, as well as a unit inspection and orientation of the property. Eden Housing is excited to open this next Fremont project along with the city's involvement. Please refer to any updates at edenhousing.org for Find a Home.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. So now let's take we are actually early, so we can actually take a 10-minute break instead of a 5-minute break. So it will give us some time to sort out some questions that came through the chat box. So let's take a 10-minute break. We will see you at 10:35. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker for today's webinar is Molly Curran of Fremont Fair Housing and Project Sentinel. Molly will give us an overview on fair housing for all. Please join me in welcoming Molly.
Hi, everybody. I am so pleased to be here to speak with you. I can't possibly cover everything that might be important to you. about fair housing in the time that I have. So I invite you to visit our website at www.housing.org, where we have all sorts of good information about all sorts of fair housing issues for you. But let me get going with what I think is most important for me to deal with today. And I'm going to share my screen now. I'm hopefully going to share my screen. It would be nice if I could find this. All right. Can you see this? I need somebody to verify that my screen is up.
No, Molly.
It's not? Okay.
No. Try it again, please.
Okay. Okay, let me try this again. This is frustrating. No? Let me try this one more time. I'm not seeing my presentation. How about, are you able to share it? Let's go that way. And I'll just tell you when to switch.
Okay, I'll do it.
And I'm sorry. You know, I'm not a technological whiz. I'll freely admit that. Great. All right. So I am the director of Project Sentinel, and we also operate as Fremont Fair Housing out of the Fremont Family Resource Center. And I invite you also to drop in and see us there or to contact us. So let me tell you, first of all, who we are and what we do. We are a private nonprofit agency headquartered in Santa Clara. We're funded mostly by government grants and contracts, but we operate all over the Bay Area. What do we do? Well, we obviously do fair housing and discrimination counseling, education, and investigation and enforcement. So if your rights have been violated under the fair housing laws, you want to talk to us and let us, and we'll assess whether or not, investigate whether or not there's, we have special tools like testing that we use to investigate fair housing, but we also have a landlord-tenant counseling and dispute resolution department. If what you have is a more routine landlord-tenant problem about payment of rent or security deposit or your rights under the state landlord-tenant laws. And we also have a counseling services department if you are lucky enough to be in the position of buying a house, or you are lucky enough to own a house, things like mortgage prevention, or you have a senior in your household who may be looking at reverse mortgage counseling, things like that. Okay, next slide, please. So let me cover the fair housing basics first before I talk about particular topics I think are particularly relevant to you. So what is fair housing about? It's a little bit of a misnomer because it's not necessarily unfair or negative treatment in general. And you know, there's plenty of that goes on in the landlord-tenant world. But it's more about discrimination in, slide please, you need to hit, advertising. It can be in the sale or rental of housing, whether or not somebody, you know, is willing to rent to you or sell you housing. It can also occur in the terms and conditions of the housing, the rules and regulations, the lease terms that you face, as well as the decision to terminate your tenancy. All of these are places where discrimination can and does occur. But the key about discrimination is that it has to be based on protected class status. So if your landlord just doesn't like you, if you just have a personality dispute, or maybe your landlord is really frustrated because you just haven't been paying your rent, those kinds of things are not going to be discrimination based on protected class status. Slide, please. What is the key to discrimination is, slide, differential treatment, i.e. you're treated differently than someone else who is similarly situated to you. So, and the key is that you're in a different protected class than that person. And so a good example would be two people, one white, one Latino, and they're both looking at equivalent apartments, but one is being charged rent that's much higher than the other person. Okay, that's differential treatment, right? But there has to be a clear non-discriminatory reason for that. Maybe the reason for the difference in rental rates has to do with the fact that one of those apartments has been more recently renovated or is larger than the other. That would be a reason why the rent would be different. That is non-discriminatory. That's based on the characteristics of the apartment. Slide. So I've mentioned protected category. What do I mean by that? Well, a protected category is a group of persons whom the fair housing laws, either the state or the federal law, and in some cases local laws, but mostly we're dealing with federal and state laws, that they protect from discrimination. And most of these become part of the law because there's been a historical pattern of discrimination against those groups of people, okay? So what are those protected categories in particular? Slide, please. Next slide. So we have both, first we have protected classes that are protected under both federal and the state law. In other words, under both laws. So race is one, color, religion, national origin, keep going, gender, familial status, and disability. Go back to federal, stay here, please. So what do race and color are fairly obvious. Religion is not something we see often, but let's suppose that somebody, your landlord is Christian and doesn't want to rent to you because you're not married. You're an unmarried couple, and that's inconsistent with their religious beliefs. Well, they're not allowed to bring their religious beliefs into being a landlord. You're entitled to rent that apartment just the same as somebody else. National origin pertains to not just what country you come from, but the cultural customs. It covers things like language, things that are associated with being from another country. And we are lucky enough in this part of the country to have people from all over the world, but that also means we have a lot of national origin discrimination. It's one of our most frequently kinds of discrimination that we experience. It's race. The four most common forms of discrimination that we hear about are race, national origin, familial status, and disability. I'm not going to talk a lot about familial status today, so let me just say that familial status doesn't have to do with your right to live with your family of choice, but it's really about discrimination against children. In other words, to be entitled to protection from discrimination based on familial status, you have to have minors in your household who are under the age of 18. If you're living with your adult children, you may be discriminated against because of one of the other protected classes, but it's not going to be because of familial status. Next slide, please. I'm going to be talking more about disability, so I'll go into California adds some protected classes. And those protected classes include age, marital status, ancestry, sexual orientation. Veterans have recently been added as a protected class. Keep going. Gender identity, source of income, and I think there's one more, and general personal characteristics that are unrelated to your ability to pay rent or be a good tenant. So an example of that would be somebody didn't rent to you because you were covered with tattoos, and they made an assumption that because you had a lot of tattoos, you were a criminal or you were not going to be a good tenant. Well, maybe you're a good tenant or maybe you're not, but you sure can't tell that from whether somebody has tattoos or not. You tell that by looking at somebody's previous rental history and talking to their landlords and getting information about whether they've paid their rent on time. That's a much more reliable way to determine whether or not you're going to be a good tenant than whether you happen to be covered by tattoos. Next slide, please. So let me briefly talk about familial status, simply because that is one of the most common forms of discrimination. Particularly, we seem to get a lot of cases out of Fremont on that. And in familial status discrimination, remember, protects just discrimination against children, really, families with children. And here's some examples of the common kinds of familial status discrimination that we see. Rules that prohibit or limit play unreasonably, because children are entitled to be children. Children have the same right to use and enjoy the property that everybody else does. Does this mean that children are allowed to run wild and destroy the property? No, but I'm talking about rules that, for example, that children are allowed outside at all. We see those. Rules that unreasonably limit children's use of facilities. Children are tenants too and are entitled to use. You can't have a rule that says, that children are not allowed to use the rec room, for example. Unreasonable supervision rules. Any rule that requires supervision has to take into account, the age of the child and the reason for the supervision. It needs to be something that's particularly dangerous, has to be appropriate for the age of the children. So if you had a supervision rule, for example, that required parental supervision for everybody, all children under the age of 14, that would be excessive, right? Noise issues are very common, and these are difficult because while children do naturally make noise, it can't rise to the level of disturbing the quiet enjoyment of other tenants. So there's a judgment call that your housing provider has to make in those cases. You have responsible as a parent in controlling your children and making sure that they're good neighbors. But at the same time, there are also people who are unreasonably intolerant of noise made by children, and that's not okay either. And sometimes there's discriminatory enforcement of rules against children. Like, for example, children aren't allowed to leave toys out on the balcony, but adults are allowed to leave their toys out there, their bikes and their skateboards and their whatever that is. So you have to enforce the rules in general in complexes against everybody the same. Next slide, please. The next area that we see a lot of discrimination is disability. And one thing I want to warn you against is confusing the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a gross overgeneralization, but in general, the ADA deals with the rights of disabled people to access public buildings and public spaces. Whereas the Fair Housing Act disability rights deal with your right to live in your apartment. So on the same terms and conditions as somebody who's not disabled. Next slide. What is a disability? Well, it's defined fairly broadly under the Fair Housing Law. And what you care about is the definition under the Fair Housing Law, not the definition that Social Security has, not the definition that you might have under workers' comp, but this definition, and which is a fairly low bar. It's a physical and mental impairment that limits one or more of a person's major life activity. That's breathing, eating, sleeping, your ability to socialize, these kinds of things. Next slide. So the most common context that we see disability discrimination come into play has to do with reasonable accommodations. Although there is direct discrimination against people with disabilities, sometimes the landlord is unwilling to rent somebody because they're disabled, because sometimes it's a mental disability and it look a little funny, and so the person doesn't want to rent to them, or maybe they're in a wheelchair and the landlord has got concerns that the wheelchair is going to bang up the apartment, so they're unwilling to rent to them. Those types of discrimination definitely happen, but let me talk a little bit about reasonable accommodations, because this is more likely to be something that comes into play as you're living in the apartment. And this is a change in rules, policies, practices, or services that are necessary to enable you as a disabled person to have an equal opportunity to live in the apartment and enjoy it on the same terms as somebody else. So what you're really asking for is a landlord to do something different than they usually do, whether that's to make an exception to a lease term or to some rules and regulations, or just to do something that they don't ordinarily do. Next. So what are examples, common examples of RAs? There's already been some reference to this in this presentation, but the right to have a service or companion animal, the right, and If what you have is a service or companion animal or an emotional support animal, it's not really a pet. Think of it as a prescription, because that's what it really is. It's prescribed by your healthcare provider. Is something that's beneficial and therapeutic for a disability that you have. And often it does as much good for you as a prescription for lithium or whatever your prescription might be for your condition. You might also need to break a lease. Let's suppose you're in a second floor apartment and you become immobilized. You're unable to navigate stairs anymore, and you're in a unit that doesn't have, or you're in a complex that doesn't have an elevator. You may need to move to a first floor apartment, or you may need to just break the lease and find an apartment on the first floor some other place. If you're solely dependent on disability, Social Security for your income, and you're disabled, and you don't get your check until the 10th, you can ask for your landlord to move your rental due date to coincide with when you get your rental payment. You can also ask for permission for a caretaker to live in aid. You can ask for a closer parking space. You can ask for a transfer from one unit to another for medical reasons, as well as, let's suppose that your landlord has given you a legitimate termination of your tenancy. There's no question that the landlord has the right to terminate your tenancy in those particular circumstances, but you need more time. Let's suppose you break your leg, a couple of weeks before you're supposed to move out, and you're simply unable to move. Sometimes you're able to get some additional time through all of this. The condition that's necessary for all this, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Is you have to be disabled. So if you would just like more time, but you're not disabled, this doesn't apply to you, right? Or you would just like to have a pet, but you're not genuinely disabled. You don't need one for therapeutic reasons, then this doesn't apply to you either. You have to have a disability to begin with, right? And there has to be a relationship between your disability and what you're asking for, right? Now, the landlord is entitled to request some sort of medical verification of your disability, but it doesn't have to be from a particular type of doctor or healthcare provider, right? The process simply is you need to ask your landlord for the reasonable accommodation. As a matter of law, it can be oral or written, although we highly recommend that it be written. And you're free to contact us to have us assist you in getting your to asking your landlord for this. And once you do this, your landlord has a duty to engage in the interactive process with you in a timely or meaningful way. They can't just ignore your reasonable accommodation request. They can't delay it. They can't put a bunch of hurdles in your way. And you don't have to necessarily use the magical words of reasonable accommodation. You just have to ask your landlord to do something for you because you have a disability. Slide, please. There is a recent new law that you should be aware of that just went into effect in January of this year that tightens up the requirements if what you have is an ESA sensor emotional support animal. I won't go into a lot of detail on the slide, but what it requires, if what you have is, if what you're asking for is permission to keep an ESA, an emotional support animal, you have to get now a letter from a healthcare provider who is licensed in California. You have to have a legitimate and active license, and you have to have a therapeutic relationship with that healthcare provider of at least 30 days. You have to actually see this healthcare provider and establish that 30-day relationship before the letter, right? And they have to conduct an assessment. This is trying to defeat some sort of fraudulent activities that were going on out there. That people were basically calling up on the phone and getting these fake letters, without really being any real assessment being run. So next slide. Anyway, so be aware of that. If you do need an ESA now, you need to go to a healthcare provider and actually see that person and have a therapeutic relationship for 30 days before you can get it. Another common problem is source of income. Now, in California, you cannot discriminate against a tenant because of where their income from someone. Most commonly, we see this from landlords that prefer that someone has a job. What they want is a pay stub. They can insist on a pay stub. If your source of income is from Social Security, it's from retirement income, it's from some sort of assistance program. But what your landlord can always care about is that you make enough income to afford the rent of your apartment, and that the income that you're reporting is sufficient to support that. So, for example, if it's temporary support, you've received a one-time grant from Sacred Heart to cover your rent for a month. Well, that doesn't really provide your landlord with much assurance that you're going to be able to provide to pay the rent for the rest of the year, right? Or for next month. So, or you're on, for example, unemployment, which may be of limited duration. So they're always entitled to ensure that you have enough money coming in from whatever source that is, and that is of sufficient duration to cover whatever term of rental that we're talking about here. Next slide, please. New law in California is that a landlord can no longer refuse to effect Section 8 vouchers or any form of subsidized voucher as a form of payment. There's still lots of this going on because this is relatively new law. And they have to calculate your financial eligibility to pay based on what you're going to pay. So if your portion of the rent is $300 and their requirement is that you make 3 times the rent, then they have to base that on the $300. In other words, they can insist that you make 3 times $300, not 3 times the total amount of the rent, which includes the portion that the government pays, right? So we're finding lots of this still going on. So we're happy to reach out to your landlord and educate them if that's going on. It's not going to be a problem at these 2 complexes that we're talking about today, but you might encounter it as you look for housing in other places. And like I said, there's lots of this still going on because landlords aren't necessarily keeping up with these changes in the law. They're not necessarily ill-intentioned; they just don't know, and so we're happy to educate them and make sure that that they apply the law correctly. Next slide, please. One thing that's important to understand is that the fair housing laws provide strong protection for you against retaliation from a landlord for any exercise of fair housing rights that you try to make. And what would count as an exercise? Asking for an RA. Or, telling your landlord you believe, that you're a victim of discrimination and asking your landlord to address that problem. Let's suppose you have a neighbor who is harassing your children and you want your landlord to do something about that. And your landlord responds to that by giving you an eviction notice. That would not be okay, okay? So, and like I said, it's often easier to prove retaliation than it is to prove the underlying discrimination that you were trying to protest against or that occurred. So don't be afraid to report discrimination. The main thing is you need to be able to prove that you exercise that right. So it's much better to do it in writing, doing it with a witness that's present so that you can prove that you asked for the RA or that you made the complaint. But as long as you can prove that you made that complaint, anything that your landlord does negatively, within a reasonable time after you make the complaint is presumptively retaliatory. And that is discrimination. Next slide, please. What do you do if you believe you've been a victim of discrimination? Well, you can just tell your housing provider, hey, I believe I've been a victim of discrimination, or I really encourage you to contact us, because sometimes, we have staff attorneys on our team, and sometimes, just a letter coming from an organization will have a little bit more oomph than you just telling your landlord that you've been a victim of discrimination. And, and we'll cite all the cases and all of that. So, we'll help you deal with your landlord if you want to do that. Sometimes you can raise the fair housing defense as a defense in a UD proceeding, although we don't recommend that, but if you do find yourself being evicted and you believe that you're being evicted for discriminatory reasons, that is an option that you have. But the more common form of enforcement is to make an administrative complaint to either HUD, which is the federal agency, or to DFEH, which is a state agency, right? If it's in a very extreme case, you can also bring a lawsuit, although you'll need a lawyer, and you'll almost certainly need to work with an organization like Project Sentinel to get your case into condition for it to be ready to be filed as a lawsuit. But an administrative complaint, we can help you file that and prepare that, and we advocate for you in that proceeding. But you also can do that yourself. You can just go to HUD or DFEH, they both have websites, and file a complaint yourself if you don't feel comfortable reaching out to us. Although I will tell you that having an agency like ours involved in your HUD or DFEH complaint really increases the likelihood of success of that complaint, and that your complaint will be taken seriously. But I also want you to know that you're empowered. Okay, if you want to do it yourself, you can, and we can also help you do it yourself. You know, we can give you the link to the proper website and help you fill out the complaint if it's something you want to do on your own. We're happy to help you, whatever you feel comfortable doing. You can also file a BRE as a Bureau of Real Estate, and you can, you know, this applies more if there's been a broker involved, or somebody who real estate agent of some kind involved. So less relevant to you as tenants, but would be relevant if you believe you've been a discrimination in buying a house or something like that. Okay, next slide. So that's all I have. Here's our website, which has all sorts of wonderful resources for you. And it's topical. So if you're particularly interested in national origin discrimination, or you want more detail about reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, I didn't touch on that today, but that's where you're disabled and you need a wheelchair ramp or a physical change to the property, or any of the other types of discrimination that I briefly touched on today. There's more information about all of them on our website. And I really encourage you to call us. And I unfortunately neglected to put my phone number on this slide. I apologize, but that will be available in the materials later, that will be available to all of you. And so thank you. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat.
Thank you, Molly. So I just want to remind everyone that as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, today's presentation and the Q&As and the whole recording of the webinar and the slides, I should say, will be available in about the next few days on our webpage, which is www.fremont.gov/housing workshops that you can see on the screen. So if you log in late or if you missed the presentation, feel free to go to this webpage. It will be available in a couple of days. So right now we have about 10 minutes for some questions, and we will try to cover the questions that were not in the presentations. So Margot, do we have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. I think the question is for Jared or Maya. So for Doug Ford Senior Apartment, is the senior apartment complex only for adults over 55, or can I apply with a child? Also, another question, I think the wife is older than the husband, so can both of them still apply? So those are two questions that you can answer.
Under the tax credit program, all household members are required to be 55 and older. That's the age restriction for this property.
Okay. Okay, so another one is for both developments, if the income of my parents is lower than the median income, may I sponsor them to meet the requirement?
I can take the lead on that. We do allow for cash contributions. So through the certification process, we would just need to verify that the person who would be supporting the household has the liquid assets available to do that. And that would be an allowable source of income for qualification.
The same for Eden Housing, we do accept a verification of regular contributions or gifts supporting the family. We will ask for a verification. At this point, we're not asking for history of a payment, but that's appreciated to show that there would be continuing payment. We do not want to move someone in that wouldn't have the ability to pay rent. But Eden does have other support services once they become residents on being able to afford the rent. But once signing the lease, that the expectation is that they'd be able to pay that monthly rent.
Okay, thank you. And for both developments, again, the question is, if your current income qualifies, but you made too much last year, how is that treated?
We look at current income and we'll project forward based on the current situation for the household. So we do understand things change in a household, and sometimes households lose income or gain income. So we're really looking to capture the current case scenario and what they expect to earn over the upcoming year.
Same for Eden. Eden will request tax returns, and we will look at all employment or unemployment, self-employment lists listed on the taxes, and make sure that those positions have been permanently terminated from or won't continue. But we do also project forward, but also look at the last year's statement, tax returns.
Okay, thank you. And another one, do I need to apply to each site separately, or is there a common application?
The individuals would need to apply separately to each site or waitlist opportunity.
Okay. Another one, if you have a live-in aid, does their income count toward household income? Jared and Maya, can you please answer that question?
No, it does not. So we would, there's a process for verifying the need and approving a live-in aid, but live-in aids are exempt from the income qualification piece. However, they also do not have occupancy rights outside of their position as live-in aid.
Okay. And for both the
I'm going to say that's completely consistent with what the fair housing laws require. In fact, you cannot consider the income of the live-in aid, and it's true, absolutely, that the live-in aid does not have tenancy rights, and that creates issues sometimes.
Okay. Another one for both developments. What does a background check consist of, and how far back are they going to check?
I can speak for John Stewart Company. Our background check consists of credit, motor vehicle, criminal, both county and nationwide. And typically, I think it goes back about 7 years.
We're the same, including sex offender. We're looking for that they'll be a good renter. So we're not looking at medical bills would be excluded, student loans would be excluded, but utility, unpaid utility bills or something that would affect their housing would be reviewed, and they do have a right to appeal. So there might be something that comes up on our credit screening that is not applicable to the household. So we do have an appeal process to make sure that the credit screening is not incorrect.
And we'll offer that appeals process as well. And all of that, again, will be outlined in the tenant selection criteria that's posted on the county website where you apply for the online wait list. And it's also available at the leasing office.
Another question here. Can a non-citizen apply?
Yes.
Okay. And is it same for Barbara for Eden Housing?
Yes, since we're low-income housing tax credit program, we're not under a HUD funding, Section 8, yes.
Okay. Thank you. There's another question here. I'm not sure, Jared or Maya, if you guys mentioned on your slides, when will be the application process going to be start? I believe for Eden Housing, they're going to start mid-June.
We're anticipating around the end of this month or early June. We're working out the final details for the portal setup.
Okay. I think that is the common questions that we received. We will be posting some of the FAQs on our website. If it's not this week, it will be early next week, including the slides and the recording.
Thank you. So I also saw one question regarding if you're an Uber driver, do you qualify to be a prioritized applicant considering as working in Fremont? So here's the definition for everyone. Living in Fremont is defined as a person or household who is currently a resident within the current incorporated area of Fremont, and where that location is considered to be the household's permanent place of residence. The city may require applicants to submit a driver's license, voter registration, utility bill, vehicle registration, or other evidence as proof of residency in Fremont. And also working in Fremont means earning one's primary source of annual income, salary, wages, commissions, and working at least 50% of working hours, such as 20 or more hours per week within the city limit. At the time of the application, employment must be by a Fremont employer that is licensed and permitted by the city at a primary work site in Fremont, or as providing household help, gardening, or similar services to a Fremont resident, or through operation of a Fremont-based business that is licensed and permitted by the city. Working in Fremont does not include self-employment consisting solely of operating a business entity established solely for the purpose of investment in a rental property. It is kind of long, this definition, but it is gonna, these two written definitions of living and working in Fremont are on the application in the Alameda County portal. So I just wanted to share that with you because I saw a question about that. So before we conclude the webinar, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation. I also like to take a moment to encourage everyone in attendance today to become engaged in the City of Fremont 2023 to 2031 Housing Element Update, which is a plan currently under development to meet the housing needs of everyone in our community during the next 8 years. The purpose of the housing element is to promote safe, adequate, and affordable housing for everyone in the community, including those at the lowest income levels and those with special housing needs, such as seniors and those with disabilities. For more information, please visit www.fremont.gov/housing elements. And be sure to check our website in a couple of days to find materials from this webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you for the speakers, for your presentations, and thank you for your attendance. Have a great day.
You.